All right. So, well, the subject is Homer, and specifically Homer 7, but I'm going to make some analogies to the older version and the one that you already have an integration with, so that, you know, it kind of makes sense. So the evolution in this case of the version is about, you know, correcting some design limitations and expanding the capabilities of Homer. So as you know, and as you have seen this example, it was already pretty good at tracking, you know, SIP session dialogues, messages, and conditions related strictly to signaling. And it had some features to pair exactly RTCP statistics, logs, and other kinds of data to them, but it was still pretty SIP-centric. So you could only search by basically SIP methods and IDs and so on. You could never search for this correlated data. Plus, Homer, you know, quite frankly, was a little too complex to set up. It needs, you know, a bunch of pieces, and they change quite a lot between operating systems. And oh, what's this? And generally speaking, you know, we get a lot of people stuck, you know, during the installation process. So we wanted to make it standalone. So now we have new capture servers. So the part that you are using the most, so the sending part remains the same. So all app agents in Kamailio and any other system, FreeSwitch and so on, remain valid. But the server component changes. So we no longer require Kamailio or OpenSIPs for the capture server part, so everything gets easier. And we accept just about anything that you will throw at Homer from now on and make it searchable. So this means that you can start sending correlated logs, your own protocols, anything from RTC engines. We already have support for Janus and MediaSoup, but literally takes about, I don't know, a half hour to add the new protocol to the system now from scratch. We did today at the earlier on at the summit. Today we were presenting the same thing, and we added CDR search in Homer, just to make an example. So we were taking CDRs produced by the system, we were turning them into an object, sending it to Homer, making it searchable, and correlated to SIP, so that you could literally make a pseudo transaction search, something that you know, you would find in other products that actually track it, and have it automatically correlated. So this is something that now becomes possible. Just to try and explain really what's changed in the platform, I have a couple of diagrams that I'm going to use. So this is the old version or the current one with 5. So we have either Kamailio or OpenSIPs acting as a capture server. We send it data from other Kamailios, FreeSwitches, our own agents, whatever it is. And quite simply, we use the parsers and the database capabilities of Kamailio or OpenSIPs to write them to database. And on the other hand, we had our own UI and the API and everything else that you would be familiar with if you used it. The limitations of this approach were mostly related to the abilities of using the data that we are producing for alerting purposes. So it was not as easy or as flexible as we want it to be to make it actionable. So this is how it looks today. It's quite a bit more complex internally, but it doesn't translate into complexity for the end user at all. Quite simply, we now accept any type of HEP types, those that we defined, and dynamic ones that you can literally come up with overnight and start sending to the system with no development needs. As packets make it into the platform, as you can see here, we have 2 new servers. We have a Amplify server, which is basically a hot swap replacement for what Kamailio was doing on the capture role. It's made in Go, so it's a simple single binary. You download it, you give it permissions to run, and set one config file, and you're done. You have a capture server in 1 second. So this is going to make it a lot easier to bundle it up with your platform and many others. And we do switch apart the packets that we save to database. So, you know, the methods, the logs, whatever it be that you're sending to the platform, and the statistics that we can derive from them. So as of these versions, the number of, you know, invites that we see, the number of failures, the responses, as well as, you know, how many maybe devices we have registered for user agent, they all get turned into tagged time series that we can currently send to either InfluxDB or Prometheus. And those are also options for the new Homer UI. So we no longer reinvent the wheel. We no longer try to save each and every RTCP packet and then reload them with huge queries and a lot of disk space wasted, quite frankly. But we turn them into slim time series that are also easier to share or integrate in the context of a user portal. So if you want to show somebody their average MOS or the packet loss for the last X hours, days, or months, now it's quite easy. It's a cheaper query, and thanks to the tagging mechanism, we can retain the correlation abilities of the platform. So the way that we know that a SIP session is related to a log or a set of RTCP statistics and so on, it gets really easy to assemble those together. Do you guys have any questions seen so far?
I have one.
Quick question. We use TickStack. We think it's great. Did you write a new plugin for Telegraph?
No, it's the native one. So we just made our server able to push natively to it. So you can, or well, it's optional, as you know. So we could also just write to InfluxDB, but we have a full client on board, so we can read and write from InfluxDB, and we also use it to display back in the UI. So actually, I can switch to that. The Homer UI now is just a generic UI for InfluxDB, just as much as Chronograph would be. So when you go and select time series in Homer, you can now, oops, I didn't select anything. I have to log in. All right, so you can see here, I already have CPU usage. So let's switch to something that has absolutely nothing to do with Homer. I could go now and look at the memory statistics that Telegraph is producing in the Homer UI.
Awesome.
So this allows us to, mix data that we produce by monitoring with data that we produce, other parts of the system. So, for instance, what happens to the quality of my calls when the CPU is above, 80% on a specific system, or what are the conditions that are actually impacting it. So we can have a comparison, and you already know the tick stack, so you already know that we're going to be using capacitor for making the rules. So now it gets really, really easy to go and create an alert. Here I have just a simple example for variable relative checks on packet loss measurements that we have. So if packet loss percentage changes in compared to the previous 5 minutes more than 5%, send me an alert. And this is all going to be against data that we can directly write. So there is no overhead. We go straight to the bone, and of course we can display it back in Homer the same way that we used to in earlier versions. So trying to keep it simple and make it easier to integrate. So Homer 5, just like Homer 3, is a little bit of an island. So it has a lot of valuable information inside, but it's hard to get it out of it and to recycle it in other environments. So this version solves a lot of those issues. It also doesn't use the old API, but it remains compatible. So no fear. Whatever the previous integration was, it should continue working with very minor adjustments. But it's going to give you a documented and stable API. So from now on, we can build a bunch of additional features on top of it. Another feature that I might show you since we're here is exactly the ability to create search forms for custom protocols that we're going to be indexing. So the classic SIP, where I can select anything from my session, but I could also switch. Actually, let me do it in a different panel. I could switch to a different protocol. In this case, I think this was present for the Janus event API. It could be the free switch ESL, which we, by the way, directly support in Homer since also the previous version. So we can attach to the ESL. We can take events, we can correlate them to the calls that you're capturing them, and we can show them alongside the call. So you can literally see the decisions that FreeSwitch, for instance, was making, or any other system, alongside the messages that we would be capturing. But going back to the subject, as I select a different protocol and a profile, this is made to separate between, you know, the tracking of messages or events related to calls versus registrations, or, you know, just keep alive noise. And I have a completely different set of search fields that I can now select and use to create, you know, my dream farm that I can use to quickly search. We also have the raw version of the event. So if I use that, I even have, I even have full wildcarding capabilities. So I can go and look for a message that contains 24, or, you know, even go and check against, you know, packet size or whatever it be. So trying to make Homer into a more generic environment where, you know, we retain all of the SIP skills that it matured over the 7 years that we've been developing it, and it's now open to everything else. So it can also become literally a headless platform now. So the capture service also would allow you to just take you know, the messages, use their correlation, and then send them to your own backend. We can, you know, fork events to, for instance, Elasticsearch or Graylog, or, you know, other platforms that can be used for deeper analytics very, very easily.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Boom, drop the mic.
RTP, is that a thing that is supported by Homer, RTP capture?
Yeah, well, that's a commercial feature. So our company provides this as a separate product. It's called RTP agent. And it's basically a custom agent that's able to do inline RTP analytics. The effect is much like the analytics that you would get from, you know, VoIP Monitor or other solutions, but they're designed in a privacy-friendly way, so that we never look or decode or record the payload. Also because, you know, regulations on this front are becoming more and more strict. So what we do is we do inline analytics. So you decide the size of the bucket. So let's say that we decide every 10 seconds you want a full report, and this is what the agent would do. And it does automated correlation, of course, with the legs that it's reporting for, so that we can basically do full band RTP analytics with those granular aggregations at about 5% of the original bandwidth. So without, you know, dumping anything to disk, fully compliant with, you know, the most regulations. And we keep the recording feature something separate. We actually call it what it is. We call it interception. And right now it's available as a commercial extension that you can pair to your Homer setup, or to Hepic, which is the commercial version of the stack, which has a completely different design. It retains the compatibility with the HEP format, but it's more of a, you know, carrier grade type of product made for, you know, large scale deployments and, you know, millions of concurrent calls. For everything else, you know, Homer does great. So small, medium, we believe are, you know, fully covered by the current features, and we're always open for, you know, hearing new requests, new ideas, and so on.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have two questions. One's easier than the other. First of all, you mentioned some of the modules are commercial only. Do you have pricing posted, or can you share what average pricing is for that?
It depends. We have a variety of models. What we find is that you know, we're a small company, so we try to make tailored solutions. So generally speaking, we do also sell the agents. I think the perpetual pricing for an agent is it's a little below 2,000 euros for a perpetual unlimited license. So for an agent that can produce as much as you feed it in resources to Homer or Hepic, or we provide it as part of a subscription model. So you get our support and the agent bundled together, which is what most customers, quite frankly, choose. And you know, this is sized to the type of architecture that we go after, and typically we do it together with Homer. So most of our customers, they get us to, you know, maintain or support their setup, and they pair it with a number of agents or additional features. This is not the only one that we provide on top of the stack. But it, so to speak, it doesn't bastardize Homer itself. So Homer doesn't really have any of the capabilities. It doesn't capture anything itself. So it's all about the agents, and anybody is absolutely free to enhance those features. So sometimes they're sponsored into our agents, other times they're not. RTP right this time, has more of a commercial traction. So to make use of it on a large scale, we have customers that use literally hundreds of them, 500-600 of those agents at the same time to cover their infrastructure. So you can understand the pricing in those cases changes a lot.
Sure. So my next question was, I see that you can hand off to Telegraph and then from there to Prometheus or something else.
Yeah.
Do you have the ability, or would it be a separate module to be able to pipe that to Graphite?
Sure. We actually can already. So, I didn't put it up in the slide, but it's a very tiny difference between it and the way we ship to Influx, at least the original one. So it's basically already there. I just, it has much less demand, so we didn't put in slide. But we do have, there's a component of our stack, which is called Pastash. It's kind of a log stash for Homer and the HEP world. And this is able to transform all of the data that we ingest and emit to pretty much any format. So you can take and send to queues, convert between documents and statistics. And of course, there we support fully StatsD, InfluxDB, and a bunch of more things, including like RabbitMQ, ZeroMQ, MQTT, NSQ, and all of those methods allow you to distribute those events. So if you don't want to collect them straight to Homer, you can also create a queuing overlay on top of everything that we can do, so that you can have like one actual delivery point to Homer, but you can have an infinite number of feeds without using HEP.
So, question for you then. You're saying that you could display like the logs kind of side by side with the SIP events and the other events of the call. And you're also saying that you had Elasticsearch integration. Does that mean that you can have correlated events in Elasticsearch that will display along with the SIP events, like the logs that you say you have? Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and we do. So this is actually our company also is behind. I think it's the second or third most popular plugin for Elasticsearch in terms of alerting, which is Sentinel. So we do a lot of work in that direction, and Homer can emit a bunch of stuff towards Elasticsearch, and the new user interface can get correlated events from other APIs. So it's generic, so it goes beyond what simply Elasticsearch. We can take the correlation IDs, whatever they would be. Now they're elected by a mapping API. So for each protocol, you can say, hey, those two fields I want to use for doing external lookups. And of course, we can build dynamically a query towards Elasticsearch. So I would say the only complexity is on the authentication front. If you can give it the right permissions and set, the right type of access for this kind of integration, and it can get complex, when you have users on both sides, and maybe you don't want all of your data to be just accessible just because, in theory, it can be correlated. That's the only complexity layer. But in terms of just making the query, it's very easy. It's already there.
Cool. All right, I got to jump off for another meeting.
So Lorenzo, if I wanted to enable or set up Homer 7 with Camilio, is it the same config? Because I would set something like I don't know, whatever it is, HEP. The HEPs. Right, hang on, let me find it. HEP mode on is 1, or is that completely separate and we wouldn't use that because there's a new agent?
From, let's say, the client perspective, so mirroring data to Homer, nothing changes. So it's fully backwards compatible, so you can continue using the new, the old config just unchanged. Everything changes on the server side. So as of now, you no longer need another Kamailio on the receiving side with the modules and stuff, but it's a single executable, is statically linked, and it has everything built in. So it just gets simpler on the server side. So we haven't published the installation instructions and the Docker containers yet. We'll do it next week. So as of Monday/Tuesday, due to the time zone differences there, you'll find on our GitHub the new release with the instructions. It's still in beta phase, so it does have still a few bugs, but we think they're going to be hammered out during the first weeks or first month. So yeah, basically as of next week, you'll find the full instructions, and of course we're happy to support anybody that supports us. So every user now is precious to make sure that we get to a stable release as quickly as possible. But it's fully functional, so some of our early users already had it in production for quite a few months and are happy with it.
So you mentioned that there's some new clients or a new HEP agent written in Go or something, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have Heplify. That's the new brand, let's say, for this new generation. So we have Heplify client, which is a simplified version of Capit Agent. Here too is developing Go, statically linked. So it's a single binary. You put it on the system, you give it permissions, you run it, and that's it. And it does automatic correlation of SIP to RTCP and even logs to a certain extent. And on the other side, we have Heplify Server, which is exactly the replacement for Kamailio and the SIP capture module part.
That's great. We're excited to use it. I think everybody here is going to be using it right away.
Well, looking forward to hearing from you guys and helping you out do so.
Thanks, Lorenzo.
Anyone have any questions? Any other questions? Okay, well, that's great. Thanks, Mikhail, for inviting Lorenzo along. Thanks, Lorenzo, for staying up very late. You're at the OpenSIPS conference, is that right?
Yeah. Tomorrow's the last day, and then we're off to Kamailio World and CompCon UK and so on and so forth. So we'll do. If you are at any of the major conferences, you'll find one of us there, and we'd be happy to meet and talk.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.